Welcome back to Out of This World. I have a super special guest. Ooh, I love your glasses. His name is Thomas from Paranoid American. Welcome.
Thank you. I feel very welcome. I appreciate you having me here.
Nice, and I love your co-host over there, Slimer, dancing in the background. He's given the Slimer vibes. I love it.
It helps in case the stream ever freezes. You can tell if I've just gone very stoic or if
Right.
like we're still broadcasting.
Wait, I can see you're on the neon train too, because we love the neon. We've got all that. But I want to tell you guys a story before we get into it tonight. I have actually met Thomas, and we have had a curse on our household since that day.
I
You
knew it.
would not believe. So we tried to go to an event called Bohemian Grove, where Jay was supposed to sing all his cringecore songs and get to know lots of other cool podcasters and do his comedy thing. We were so excited. And he got sicker over the day. We drove all the way to Tampa. I said, I'll drive you there and you do your thing and we can leave right away. And he's like, I'll try, like he was being a trooper. But we got there and I walk in and I see these cool occult little books. And I'm like, this kind of takes me back because it was like a merch table that you would see at a conference, like an old conspiracy conference or something.
Hell yeah.
And I was like, yeah, these look cool. I'm gonna get them. So I bought them. And I'm flipping through and I go to the QR code that comes with those. And I go to your website, Paranoid American. And I'm trying to take care of him, but I'm so interested in what's going on. And I'm like, I see Occult Book Club. I'm like, cool, I love occult books. That's my whole shtick. That's our thing we do on Rockfin. And I click on the first one and it's mind control. And I'm like, oh, neat. And then his other play was like Occult Disney. And I'm like, did we just become best friends?
Absolutely.
Right? Occult Book Club, Fritz Springmeier, Occult Disney. I mean, you're speaking my language. So I was like, I gotta get this person like old school occult pamphlets. So I am saving all my energy. I didn't want to cancel on you because I was too excited, but we have had flus since that day that I met you.
Yeah, well, welcome to Bohemian Grove.
Thanks. So let's just talk about your background for a second because I know my audience is gonna go crazy over your channel. Seems like you've hit the ground running on all of this stuff. And so just tell us a little bit, how did you get so smart? What's up with that?
Just a nerd. I grew up with a lot of bullies in my area, and I ended up getting my mom was a public school teacher, and this was back when Steve Jobs was giving apples to educators and filling them up with schools, especially in the Northeast. I grew up in upstate New York, and I ended up basically just teaching myself how to program when I was, I don't know, like 8 or 9, and slowly just like started getting better and better at that. And at some point, I was introduced to working in audio and video and like post production, and I downloaded a bunch of pirated versions of 3D Studio Max, like version 2 or whatever. And I was absolutely fascinated by this concept of like just using pure energy, like no physical matter is moving anywhere at all, but you're creating music and movies and animation and pictures and stuff. And it just like fascinated me endlessly. So I kind of knew, I guess lucky real early on, that I just wanted to do digital art creation for like the rest of my life. So I've just been going as hard in the paint as I could ever since then. I joined the military right out of school to do technology, to do programming, and that kind of changed the entire course of my life. It gave me like I was already a little bit conspiratorial minded because I grew up when X-Files was big. A
We
lot of the music I listened to, it was all about Illuminati and don't trust the government, and I didn't really know what a lot of that meant. My favorite album was one from Kill Army called Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. Had
Mhm.
no idea what that actually meant at the time. I just really liked the concept. So I kind of had all the ingredients. And then once I joined the military and like got a taste of like big boy real world stuff, then it started solidifying. And then it was like, oh, maybe some of these weird conspiracy fictional sounding things that I found novel, maybe there's something to that. So that was sort of like the birth of my my origin story. I had a long road after that. I ended up getting boosted out of the military because I didn't want to take one of their experimental things that they were pushing. This is in 2002 or 2003.
Uh-huh.
And immediately from there, I got a job at Disney and I worked at
Oh,
Disney for
yes.
10 years.
So worlds are converging and realities are collapsing here. So you've gone from an avid reader as a child to conspiracy UFO, like you mentioned X-Files. We're big X-Files nerds. That's a opener for a lot of people. Like what is going on out there? They just had a meeting about UAPs and UFOs yesterday, like a congressional
Right
hearing.
in Congress.
Yeah. So I feel like every time something goes wrong, they try to pull out aliens, and everyone's like, we don't care. If there's no real aliens running around, like we don't, do I still have to go to work tomorrow? Then I don't care.
Right.
Like,
Is my mortgage still due? That's a really
yeah.
big one.
We're-
Also, whoever's planning Blue Beam out there, like you guys missed your shot. Like the 1990s, maybe the early 2000s, that would have been the absolute best time to do it all. And now I think we're just a little bit saturated, a little bit worn out, and also almost expecting it. Like
Mm,
after you see the Tupac hologram, then you see an alien. A lot of people are going to be like, wait a minute, is just another Tupac thing at Coachella?
yeah, exactly. So unless there's actual like UFOs floating above the capitals, I don't think anyone's gonna care. Uh, but we keep on talking about aliens because we know that's one of the psyops that they like to play a lot, right?
And they've also done a really good job at the same way that politics works. We've got like these two main parties to go with. They're also sort of defining what would constitute an alien or what constitutes like an
Mm,
actual UFO. And they
hmm
keep showing you light orbs, or maybe it's the little gray men, or maybe it's the reptilians or whatever. But
hmm
it's just these very convenient ways to automatically group everything into certain categories. And it also, my opinion, is just a way of like planting these ideas as well. So now when someone does have an experience, they'll lean into the template that was kind of provided for them.
hmm So how did you find working at Disney? I see you have at least 50 or between 50 and 60 Disney movie reviews on
Right, that
your
was
channel.
something that I did a show with Sam Tripoli on Tinfoil Hat, and we
Uh-huh.
broke down a whole bunch of occult Disney stuff, Walt Disney's upbringing in Demolay, which is sort of like a Cub Scouts for Masons type thing.
hmm
And then really Fantasia is
hmm
one of my favorite things to break down. And from that, I linked up with someone that had heard that episode, Matt Comages, and he's been doing podcasting for like 5 or 6 years. I was brand new, didn't have any of my own shows. I had guested like once or twice, and even before then, I'd have to like prep myself mentally for a couple hours to not be frazzled. So I figured this would be a great opportunity to just practice and figure out the format and figure out almost Toastmaster style, try and get all the likes and ums and buts as far away as the normal conversations I can. And
hmm
over time, the original premise just kind of resonated with me a lot because we decided to watch every single theatrical Disney animated release from Snow White up until right now. I'm watching Valiant, which I think is like 2005, 2006.
Are
And a
you
lot of
okay
that,
after all that? Like, do you...
yeah, I mean, honestly, I have more like trauma from just having to go to work and deal with some of the Disney politics.
Yeah.
Watching a Disney movie doesn't really scar me.
Uh-huh.
Again, maybe going through the military too, like I help raise my barrier for what trauma actually constitutes.
So speaking of trauma, did you discover like your first occult book that I saw on your playlist was Fritz Springmeier, Illuminati Mind Control. That's a classic, that's like one of the textbooks of what we talk about, right? So did you discover that before you were working at Disneyland or after?
Oh, way before. I
Okay.
found, I think the first occult book I ever found was Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly Palmer Hall.
Yeah.
And this was on one of those like sacredtext.org type sites, even in the late 90s, or like whale.to, one of those. And I remember every time it would come up, it would just blow my mind because it would break down. I liked reading mythology. My mom was huge into Greek and Roman mythology. So I kind of grew up with a lot of those stories, but it was always like these huge marble statues in the sky doing these things that weren't as relatable. And once I discovered Manly Palmer Hall, it brought it like right in front of my face, and it almost made them like living, and like the
Mhm.
symbolism, all of a sudden I understood, or at least I started to get a glimpse of like, why is that scorpion there? Why is he stabbing that bull? You know what, like, why is that funny hat on his head,
Uh-huh.
that he's dressed up like the Smurfs? And once I started realizing, oh, this is all encoded information, I kind of just went down a deep rabbit hole of like, okay, what else is on this site, that like all the sites that keep showing me the secret teachings of all ages.
Uh-huh.
And of course on there you would find Fritz Springmeier. So I think I came across him and the Illuminatus trilogy somewhere in like year 2000, 2001. I had just gotten into my actual like a enlistment, my assignment in the military. And it
Uh-huh.
was weird because we had also just experienced 9/11. And I think that one kind of set, this is like one of those big things that set me over the cliff in the conspiracy world, is because when 9/11 happened, I was in boot camp and we were just doing regular drills and stuff out on the mat. And they bring us all inside and they give us flashlights and they have us stand out on the roads and like get into like the halt who goes there sort of posture, holding our little flashlights and wearing like safety vests. And no one had any idea what was going on. And wasn't for I think another 2 weeks, and somebody's parents managed to write something that they didn't read or they didn't notice. And then somebody, hey, I think like something happened in like the outside world. And once that rumor started making its rounds around all of the trainees, eventually the TIs brought everyone in and said, "Yeah, there's been this whole attack and everything." But I just remember at that moment and the rest of this basic training, but how easy it was to keep somebody in a bubble, and also that the outside world had all gone through this cathartic like reuniting, and we're all Americans, we love each other and we're
Mhm.
stronger. And I didn't go through any of that. Like I was just tired and doing sit-ups and running that entire time
Uh-huh.
with no inclination. So that was kind of when I maybe thought back on the Fritz Springmeier and some of like the MK Ultra stuff, like,
Well,
oh
did you
wow,
make
maybe
any
there's something to
connections?
that.
Like they're trying to break me down and rebuild me, you know.
100%. The
Yeah.
very first night in boot camp, as soon as I got in, this is like the most vivid memory I've got of all boot camp. But the first night, as everyone's kind of entering this room the first time, they're wearing their civilian clothes, they got their crazy hair and stuff. I think I had like a huge afro at the time. Like everyone's babies, or at least they are completely oblivious to what's going on. And they had three TIs sort of like as a checkpoint, right as people would come in, screaming at whoever the next person to walk through the door was. But I kind of like slunk away and I went to the back of the room. I started unpacking my stuff. So I just kind of was observing. And every single new recruit that walked in the door, one guy would yell at him to get in the shower. One guy would yell at him to like go and unpack his stuff. And then
Mhm.
another one would tell him to like put his clothes on or something. So like the first guy would get in the shower, take your clothes off, blah, blah, blah. And the
Yeah.
second guy's like, what are you doing? Put your shirt back on, go over there.
Yeah.
And I realized that they're not actually giving them commands that they're expecting them to follow. Like they're obviously just giving them all these conflicting instructions to see how they handle it and which decision they make.
Uh-huh.
And so many people went into the bathroom and took a shower with their all of their clothes on, because they couldn't decide like, well, I don't want to ignore this guy yelling at me, so I'll kind of do what all three of them are saying. And I
Uh-huh.
could kind of see how every person was reacting a little bit different to that. And all I
Uh-huh.
was thinking the whole time was like, oh, this is that Fritz Springmeier stuff. This is that MK Ultra programming. I get it now. But you like, it was hard to visualize without going through that experience and seeing it happen on like a massive scale.
That's so interesting because on the cover of the book that I gave you, there's a princess and a soldier. And so what we were noticing like back in that era was like princess warrior programming, right? And
G.I.
all,
Jane, right?
yeah, but like all the girls were pink and princess and all the boys were like military. Like it's not that way anymore because we've changed it through the androgyny. But when I was like researching and writing that, if you would go to Target, everything in the girls' aisle would be like pink princess, and everything in the boys would be super like military or dinosaurs, just everything violent. Um, Not that there's anything wrong with militaries or whatever, but it's just like there's only two choices back then.
My favorite example of that one was that a lot of the toys were basically the exact same toy. They would just make a girl version and boy version. So like
Uh-huh.
Polly Pocket
Uh-huh.
was really big, and it
Yeah.
was all princess and clamshells and pink and pastels. And then there was one called Mighty Max, which was exactly the same as what Polly Pocket was,
Yeah.
but it was like a guy that was going into these skull-shaped caverns and chains and
Oh
axes and
yeah. I
but
remember.
I remember that whole sort of like I guess false binary stuff that
Mhm.
was getting pushed. And again, it's in my mind, I guess the way that I've grown up, but it's just always seeing how having people to label themselves and put themselves in buckets is so convenient for everyone but them, right? Like it makes it convenient for your jobs and your society and your government and everything. And that's just
Yeah.
another version of that.
Well, we were talking about that in relation to consumerism, and you just made me remember my buddy and kid sister.
Right, right.
Who would think that a little boy wants to carry around a life-size doll with them? But yeah, my buddy and kid sister.
This is kind of where we got Chucky from, I think.
Exactly.
It was inherently creepy. Although the My Pet Monster, I think, bridged
Hmm.
both of those gap. Like it bridged the gender gap, and I think he was universally cool.
My Pet Monster, I remember that, and Trolls.
Yep.
I-
And there was like little goblin things, moglins or something that you would wear in your hand,
Yes.
and like make them talk. Yeah.
What are the balls that you throw with the angry faces?
Mad balls.
Mad ball. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
See, and this is, I guess, another
So
angle that I
you,
like to go on is the consumerism. It
uh,
like programmed us, but like the nostalgia is hard to separate from the
well,
consumerism.
and they created us to be occultists, almost because of magic and Harry Potter and like all of these Disney. I mean, obviously, they're training children who are intelligent and creative, um, to be interested. And I think all those types of people are drawn to the occult. And you're cracking me up because look at the cover. Like, don't these look like little mad balls and like my pet monsters,
And I
right?
got to give a shout out to Juan Ayala of the
What
One on
about
One
that?
podcast, who basically came up with the idea of doing this Occultist Monday. And this issue that you're holding up here was his baby. He's been trying to write a book on homunculus for so long, and this is sort of the first version. This is like the entry point to what eventually will be a large, expansive book. And that guy on the cover, it was actually sort of an inspiration of like a Pokemon kind of theme, like you got to catch them all. But that's Count Kufstein, who's the one guy that's in the Guinness Book of World Records for owning the most number of homunculi,
Okay.
which is one of those weird facts that doesn't sound real, but you look it up and I don't know if it's fanciful or what, but that's Kufstein, and those are his 12 homunculi.
Yeah, and I had to buy, I was looking for more. I'm like, there's only four, but I wanted the whole set. And I had to get it just because of I love stuff like this.
I grew up too with zines. I remember a lot of or zines. I don't know what
Mhm.
the correct pronunciation is anymore, but
Well,
in like the punk scene, and a lot of people were putting. And it was usually like anarchist stuff and Emma Goldman quotes. But I
yeah,
loved that whole premise. I also one of my first jobs when I was still in school was at a Kinko's back when it was just a coffee or just a copy shop, and they didn't do FedEx or any of that stuff.
yeah.
And I kind of got to know all the different locals that were printing all their own zines because they would come into Kinko's to get all that stuff done. So that was another fascinating aspect, again, of taking these raw ideas and then like somehow manifesting it into physical form now and spreading it around. I don't know if they made any waves with it, but I just a concept of, wow, you had this crazy idea last week and now you're printing out 200 of these and you're just going to like pass them out and put them in places. So that was
Yeah.
really inspiring. That like kind of shaped me a little bit.
I'm sure you can see my books were inspired by the same idea, like underground magazines and just weird stuff and Church of the Subgenius. I'm
Yes,
sure you're
yeah, all
familiar with
hail
that.
Slack.
Yeah, all that. So these are super cool. So what did you notice in your time at Disneyland? Was there any, so I'm sure you were doing a lot of recon, right? Looking at Club 33 and looking for signs and symbols. I know every time we would go there, it was all about just finding the hidden Easter eggs, and we found a bunch. And I'm thinking of like the little compass and square on the box on that fluke ride, the Splash Mountain or Thunder Mountain Railroad. That's it. So
Thunder
I,
Mountain.
yeah. Did you get to like see a lot of the park, or were you just kind of like,
Yeah, I know I did. So I was at Walt Disney World in Orlando
uh,
for 10 years, and I worked in what they called the Royo Disney Production Facility. And this is where they did a lot of the post-production, a lot of the archival, a lot of the tape stuff, and it was connected to the animation building. But at this point, the animation building, almost everything had moved over to the West Coast and Burbank, and they were, using a lot of that from CalArts. Although Orlando studio did do a whole bunch more feature film and then a lot of the direct to video type stuff. But one of the cool things is that since I worked on the studio on property, I could just leave. Like sometimes I would just be a little bit stir crazy or bored, or we had a long meeting. I could just walk out the building and go and ride a few of the roller coasters.
yeah.
Rock and Roller Coaster was literally like a 2 minute walk from my desk, like once I got out of the building. So I would just go there. We would do Tower of Terror constantly. I could probably have gone to
Yeah.
all the other ones, but it would have been a lot longer of a walk and a wait. But yeah, like I kind of lived in the park for at least 5 or 6 years until
Okay.
it got busier and the novelty wore off. And yeah, my eyes were kind of always open to all this. Although I kind of find that the hidden symbolism was definitely deeper in the adaptations and some of the stuff that gets left in the cutting room floor on a lot of like the theatrical releases.
Mm,
The two craziest things, like the most salacious, I guess, that I experienced while like actually working there and like park related. One which might sound a little bit mild, but somebody on Tower of Terror, I believe, had a heart attack. It was like one of the workers, and they died while they were working the ride. Like they didn't get trapped by it or anything. They just had like a medical issue. But what had happened was indicative of kind of a deeper sort of
okay.
mystery. Go ahead.
Do you want to hear my Tower Terror story?
Please, yeah.
Okay, so I used to be a tour guide in Los Angeles and like the Southwest. And we would take coaches, to Las Vegas or wherever. And a lot of my work was like at Disneyland in LA, taking teens to Disneyland. And I would just, you could release them for the day and give them their lunch voucher. And then you have 8 hours or 10 hours to just wait around and then meet them back at the bus, right? So I'd end up like you, just wandering around the park, like go see a movie. I knew like where to catch a nap. I knew, like the only place that serves alcohol. I knew we would just like go to the Grand Adventure Hotel a lot and just hang out in there because it's very comfortable. But anyways, but I didn't know any of the conspiracy like mind control. I knew that they were heavily into witchcraft, and I was kind of like about that. But so yeah, I'd hang out in Disneyland. And then the first time I went to Disney World, I had already read all the mind control stuff and saw this is a whole new world, right? It's not like fun Disney anymore. And we get on the Tower of Terror, and we already had to like give our thumbprint to get in. So now they're just introducing biometrics, and they're introducing like the passes that you can go on a certain time. And we had been talking
Yeah,
like
fast pass. So
yeah,
you're talking this is sometime after 2012, I think.
yeah. So, and I'm just super new to like Fritz Springmeier and the mind control thing and the Disney thing. And I'm like, and we're kind of public, and I'm like, they could probably try to kill us, so I'm already paranoid American going to the Tower of Terror. And we get to the top, and it like breaks, like right before the drop.
Mhm.
It's like clunk clunk, and they're like Firefox down, like and just and people are screaming, the kids are crying, and we're like dangling there because it was broken. And then I guess they just had to like put it back on a different track and go down slowly. So we didn't actually do the terror drop because it broke before we could do that. But we were like, no more roller coasters at Disney. They
You
are
got the terror, you just didn't get the drop part.
exactly, yeah, the no fun, but we got like the paranoid. Like, could they just get rid of us? And I don't know. It's funny. Anyway.
Well, that ride was particularly complicated for that because they made Tower of Terror so that if you rode it 5 times in one day, you would never really be able to predict when it was going to drop. That part, it wasn't random, but it was
Oh,
pre-selected from a
uh-huh.
whole list of different timings where it would like fake you out a little bit and then
Yeah.
fake you out again and then drop, or it would just straight drop the first time and then kind of stop. So it had all these different programs, but that was a known issue, is that I guess between all the different timings or whatever relays they had to make that happen, sometimes it would cause an issue. But so that was the ride that I rode the most. I mean, I was on that thing hundreds and hundreds of times. It never got boring for me. I
So,
always loved it, and that was the story that I heard, is that one of the operators had a medical issue and he basically passed. But what Disney did is that, at least in Disney World, which makes it unique from Disneyland, like in Orlando, they sort of own this whole area. Like they've got their own police force, they've got their own ambulances, their fire station, everything. They don't need any of the city of Orlando or any of the municipalities outside to intervene, and they kind of prefer it that way. And what would happen though is if someone got hurt, like this guy that passed, they wouldn't necessarily declare him dead until they got him outside of Disney property and then bring him into like Orlando proper or one of the surrounding areas, and
mm,
then declare that they were, they had passed. And this was a convenient way of Disney being able to say, no one has ever died on property, or that we've got a certain like a no incident count. And it kind of I don't know if you ever seen the show The Wire or a lot of these like cop shows. But a common theme is that if they find the floater, if they find like a body in a lake or something, they'll just kind of let it drift to like another part of the county or like over some jurisdictional line. So it's like,
yeah,
oh, okay, not our problem. Now we don't have to solve the murder. We can report it now. We don't have to solve it,
yeah.
just to keep that county's numbers low. And
Mm.
that was one of the first things I was like, wait a minute, that could definitely be manipulated a little bit. If you can, if and you've got all of your own in-house everything, security and paramedics and everything, anything that happens in the park really can stay in the park, and you can kind of push it off to the side. So that was one of them. The other one, some of them, it just feels like boring dispelling rumors, but I've heard so many rumors about the crazy rituals that happen in the tunnels under the Magic Kingdom, right? Like that this is
Yeah.
where they're sacrificing people. And so the tunnels were a dangerous place, but it was mostly because there was a few reasons. The main one is that a lot of the people that are the character actors are overworked sort of teenagers or early 20-year-old like college kids. And the way that Disney, this is kind of some cool inside baseball, I guess, but the way that Disney coordinates, they make it so that if Mickey Mouse is in the park somewhere, like in the Magic Kingdom, or he's in Tomorrowland, or he's in, Futureland or something, that he won't be present in LA, and he won't be present in Paris, and he won't be around in Disney Hong Kong either. So they make it so that even if someone were taking a picture, you couldn't be like, wait a minute, how is Mickey in these two places at one time? But what would happen
Oh,
is that
uh-huh.
once they would go into these tunnels and leave the public view, now they can come up in any of the other parks. But
Mm.
this also meant it was on such a strict schedule because they had to coordinate with what the other characters were doing in other parts of the world. It's not like you could be like, wait, give me an extra 5. It doesn't work. So you'd have people running full speed in these tunnels, which were completely dark. They're wearing costumes. You can't see well, anyways. And people would be knocking each other out and like smashing their faces together and losing teeth and like getting seriously injured constantly. So there were times that you'd see someone erupt from these tunnels like bleeding and looking like something
So,
horrible had happened to
wait
them.
a second. What you're saying is they're coordinating internationally what characters are coming out.
They are supposed to, yeah. Definitely in inner park, but they're supposed to be coordinating it, even like internationally in some cases, because this is another weird thing about Disney is if you notice, until very recently, but No one was allowed to have beards or goatees. They had very strict military style regulation. It was weird because I had just left the military and went into Disney. And as I'm reading some of the like the employee guidelines, it's like this is exactly the same. And there's a reason for that. That's because Walt Disney World, it was built by the same architects and the same blueprints, the guys that they would hire to do military bases. Because Walt kind of realized how large of an operation this was. So he had the park itself designed like a military installation.
Yep. Wow. That's so crazy. So you're working at Disneyland and you're hearing all these rumors, and you said rituals and tunnels?
I've heard that's one of the most common ones that I think I heard from like outside people that had never really been behind the scenes or worked at Disney, was that they're doing all these crazy rituals under the tunnels, right under the Magic Kingdom, the big castle and everything.
Why
That
wouldn't
was one of the
they?
most common.
Why wouldn't they? They would do that. Do you know who they're rumored to have sold Disney World to or is looking into buying it?
Recently?
Yeah,
No, who?
Elon Musk.
I mean, I wouldn't doubt that because he's kind of in place right now to sell concepts. And what
Mhm,
Disney I think has happened, because I was also there during the tail end of the Disney Renaissance, and I
mhm.
worked there through most of like their struggling. Like this was not, they didn't
So
have
what
like
year
a
was that?
re-Renaissance. I started there at 2003 or 4, and then
Okay.
I left in 2016, I believe. So I
Okay.
worked there that whole time, but um it definitely seemed that they were kind of like on the downs for all of the actual production Disney was doing.
Mhm,
And the thing that I was thinking, I guess, in my conspiratorial mind was, well, if Disney is really run by Fabians, then they maybe don't care how this movie or the next one, or even what the next fiscal year or two, maybe they don't care as much about the return, and that they're doing all this weird DEI or like others like odd movies with crazy like morality that is getting pushed into it that didn't seem to be attracting people. But that's because they're not really in the business of maybe turning profit right now. That Disney's main business is owning nostalgia. It's owning our childhoods, and it's
mhm,
making sure that our kids also are owned by that Disney nostalgia. So if someone mentions Cinderella or Snow White or Pinocchio or any of these open, like public domain sort of creations, a
mhm,
lot of people's minds goes right to Disney. And there's something really powerful about that, because even if you don't know about Disney, you're going to come across a lot of these sort of fairy tales, especially if you're in the Western world. So
mhm.
I think that Disney made a huge, huge play to own that and continuously own like chunks of not just our nostalgia and childhood, but like our grandparents and their grandparents.
Well, and
So
European lore too.
yeah, yeah, because the another weird rabbit hole, but a lot of them were based on Grimm fairy tales, among others. But the Grimm fairy tales and Disney like completely changed a lot of that. But also Disney, you could argue, they were the ones that kept this Germanic folklore in fashion, and even like a resurgence of it. Like they kind of revitalized these old Germanic tales that, I mean, there Grimm's fairy tales was popular. I think it was as popular as the Bible for a long period of time. Like it was not to be understated how popular the book was. But Disney owning it, again, it was like the greatest, if you were a Fabian, the greatest investment strategy ever, because now who would think twice about sitting your kid down in front of some Disney movies for the day and you go and do your chores, whatever. Like I was babysat, and I was at friends where it was just like if they have the Disney clamshell library, like you're
Oh
good for
yeah.
3 hours, right?
Oh, we could quote Lion King word for word, including the songs and all of the parts. I mean, we were Disney babies for sure.
And that's not necessarily normal for any other context, but for whatever reason, that's incredibly normalized, especially in America. But if your kid knows a bunch of Disney movies by heart, front to end, uh, that's almost like a normal thing. I mean, it might be, a little savant going on, but it
Kind
wouldn't
of
be
autistic,
alarming.
yes, I agree. Yeah, my little brother would be like, "Tell me Lion King," if we didn't have access to the television, I just like Mazzavenia and like every word. But that's so true.
And Lion King, I'm convinced, is programming of get ready to eat bugs. Like if they can teach a lion that he's going to survive off bugs, then humans can survive off bugs.
Oh, I figured out what Lion King is about. If you watch the live action one, I mean the CGI, not live action, but the
Right.
looks realistic. It's very Skittles erotic. Um, the undertones of when goes out to live with the misfits. I don't know. You'll have to watch it and tell me if you interpret that.
Well, that's probably one of the other big claims is that Disney puts like sexualized imagery into all of their things that are aimed at kids. And that's probably one of the more nefarious, I
Let
guess, claims against Disney.
let's just say it's alternative lifestyle coded. Like,
Right.
right. Um, so speaking of movies, I thought it would be fun for me and you to do our first hopefully of many movie reviews. And we do have somebody who comes on regular, Paul Hall, and we've done a lot of movie reviews through the perspective of Jungian psychology. So we've done like Fantasia, a bunch of them. I mean, Mind Control too, but he's expertise is just like, psychology and Disney history. But me and Thomas are gonna do Return to Oz because that is such a classic. I mean, we could probably talk about that all day just from the connection to Wizard of Oz and TheOZophy. And it's a perfect encapsulation of, what we're talking about, mind control, ritualistic trauma, disassociation, weird occult, all of that. So are you ready to do Return to Oz?
I'm ready. This is actually a perfect one because it touches on all the different topics.
Okay. Um, so this is 1985, and this just cracked me up when I thought about watching it and about like the cartoons of our generation in general. I'm thinking you're about the same age as me just by, your stories. Um, why did they hate us so much? Or
Why did they
why
hate us
did
so much?
children content creators hate us so much? Like, what is Are You Afraid of the Dark? Remember that show?
I loved that show. Yeah,
I
and it
did
like gave
too, but
goosebumps
R.L.
and
Stein, I grew up on that, Christopher Pike. But when you look at it through the eyes of adult and like the conspiracy, shine a light and put all these filters on, you're like, damn, they were trying to like traumatize me and scare me and scar me and like,
well, a thing, especially if we talk about classic Disney animation, maybe not the stuff that was made for us in the 80s and 90s, but all of the DNA that those came from, these classic Disney movies, one of the weirdest like juxtapositions to consider is that a lot of these guys were doing Disney movies, got called off to war, like
mm,
actually had body counts, like saw horrific acts of war, had, like took lives of their own, and then came back and finished the Disney movies. So there is some significant built-in trauma with all of this. And some of this was after the Lost Generation, then there was the Silent Generation, and then the Golden Generation. So this is somewhere in between what you would call the silent and the gold, like the best generation, where they were all just going to war constantly. And I think that trauma gets built into everything that they're working on. And
mhm,
then also as time goes on, there's almost like a sliding scale where these kids aren't traumatized like we were back in the day. So it's almost a way of trying to convey that same feeling, those same crazy traumas that they went through in real life and put it on everything that they're putting out in terms of art. And if obviously kids see that and they kind of are just feeling the echoes of this very real trauma that was going on.
mhm,
And I mean, the other side of me too is well, Fritz Springmeier would say this is all planned, like they are intentionally traumatizing you to open you up. And I believe that part too. But I think
mhm,
that the Disney version of that is let's traumatize you. I've got this theory that I don't think I've invented. I'm sure someone else has come up with it, but the Disney proxy, and that's the nearly every Disney movie, with the exception of like five or six that we've seen so far, dating back to the 30s. they all have this very specific formula that gets more advanced over time. But the formula is basically introduce a child and their support figures, their authority figures, and then take away the authority figures. The kid gets lost, they get kidnapped, the parents die, like something happens, and now it's just the kid by themselves in this big scary world in the unknown.
Mhm.
And again, if you're this kid that's your parents are in the other room doing, parent stuff, and you're just plopped in front of this TV, you're fully engrossed in it, and you become that protagonist that just lost all of his parents, and you actually start going through the same trauma. And the first thing that takes you out of that trauma that makes you feel good again is inevitably going to be a Happy Meal toy, or it's going to be on a lunchbox, or it's going to have like a T-shirt. And I really think that this is the formula they had been working on all along, was to, okay, we've got this trauma, and now that we know through warfare and government programs that trauma can like kind of open you up to things. Well, what do we stuff in that big trauma shaped hole? Well, how about some merch? How about some like nice commercialized toys and tickets to Disney World and stuff? So that's kind of the answer of like, why do they hate us? I think it's more of like they hate what they went through and they start putting it into everything they know. And then the corporate suits at Disney are like, oh, this, like, let's not stop this. We can actually capitalize on this. This is good.
Well, you just told this story that I wrote in my book that I gave you about trauma-based mind control and my experience with Land Before Time. It's the first movie I ever saw.
Littlefoot,
Yeah,
no.
the
Yeah,
first movie I ever
Sarah.
saw in the theater, and his mom died, and I'm like, I was shooketh as a little kid, and
Don Bluth, yeah, that was a serious one.
I had to get the Littlefoot plushie toy and like love it because it was an orphan now. Like,
Right.
you know.
It
Um,
works. It works so well. And as a kid, you've got that soft skull. You don't have like the scar tissue from being conned and scammed over and over again in real life yet. So yeah,
yeah.
you're like, I am actually helping this poor defenseless sentient plush toy from the traumas of the world. Let me like you're almost gonna
That's a
champion
part of your
for it. Like
psyche
all
now.
yeah.
Yeah. You're trying to heal that wound. So in reference
And from like a Disney standpoint, if you're the ones that are checking the numbers and signing the checks, like you actually care what those balance sheets look like. I mean, I'm making an assumption here because I don't know all the background numbers when they were going through the releases, but have to assume that they were like, hey, these movies that have some pretty significant traumas, they tend to have much wider reception. Maybe not even critical, but
hmm,
more people talk about it for longer. Bambi was another really good example of this,
mm-hmm,
and that Disney realized that there were the public backlash for that movie was so wide. Disney had to kind of walk it back, and it took years for some ecosystems to recover because people started banning you couldn't hunt deer anymore, or like they would limit it so much, not realizing that humans are basically the only thing that keeps deer cold, and if you don't cull them, then you get these huge overpopulation problems.
mm-hmm.
So Disney, once they released Bambi and they saw the effect of that, they started getting a lot more conscious and not just like throwing out trauma and then reaping on it, because they have a very real reaction in the regular world. Like
Mm-hmm.
ecosystems were affected by a movie they put out.
Well, you mentioned Fabian's, and then Bambi was also part of like a conservation push towards the wildlife rewilding and the what we have know now is like climate change and all that. Like I am
Right.
for environment, like cleaning up environments. I'm for that, but I'm not for the fake carbon tax and all that weird like climate change.
Fox and the Hound 2 was very much just like the original story was about urban sprawl. That was like the main villain in the story. The book of Fox and the Hound was just the spread of
Mm,
these suburbs that were taking over where the fox used to be able to just live its life undisturbed. And that was another it's so crazy how a lot of these go. I think one of the animators or one of the guys that was originally writing that book, he wanted to train a falcon. I think it was either a hawk or a falcon. I think it was a falcon, and because he was trying to get into that mindset of like, I'm an outdoorsman now, I'm a conservationist, like I'm one with nature. But he didn't come from that world, so he felt bad as he was raising this hawk, and kept feeding it all the time because you don't want to starve it. But I guess the way that you're supposed to train a hawk is that you essentially starve it so
Mhm.
that it only feeds when you take it out to go hunting. And then after it learns that and you got a bond, then you can kind of treat it like, a family member. But the guy that was in charge of this, he didn't get that concept. He kept feeding it and feeding it because he didn't want to starve it. And the
Mhm.
first time he brings it out, it's like, all right, I'm an actual, falconeer now. Let me
Uh-huh.
go ahead and send this bird out. It flies and never comes back because it never really understood that it couldn't just go and find food anywhere. So it's
Right.
just an example of how Disney comes and they'll say like, oh, let's make like a moral or like an ecological sort of standpoint with this movie, but they
Mhm.
don't actually understand the science. It's all on emotions, and again, it's all about trauma and feeling good and feeling bad, and
Yeah.
not so much about how things really work.
And look who's coming to save it from the woke mind virus. So I think that's just going to be another like tool in the pocket of getting the favor of people. Um, I don't
Well,
want to.
who better to do that, right?
Yeah.
If it's someone that has positioned themselves as a free speech absolutionist, like Elon has kind of been positioning that, like
Mhm.
with owning X, now people are like, please buy MSNBC or whatever, do the same thing. So that's the person that you would need to usher
So
in
he's
this
gonna
new way of thinking.
restore Disney to its glory days. Um, and we will all love him for that. Anyway, Return to Oz 1985. Did you notice it starts out in space?
I don't know if I did. Well, I
So,
saw that there was like a planet, but I guess I
uh,
didn't put two and two together on that.
so we're gonna do a show upcoming with Clint about Sirius, but it starts out panning from space into the window into Dorothy's bedroom. And so this is 6 months after her classic Wizard of Oz tale, right? Which a lot of people think that this is like a proto-socialist critique of Wall Street or some. I mean, that's one theory that fits very well. But what we're going to talk about is in regards to mind control and everything that we've been discussing. But so, yeah, you are out in space and it pans into Dorothy's bedroom and she sees a shooting star. Or she may,
Classic Disney.
yeah. And yeah, do you want to start there? Do you have any comments on the opening scenes?
Well, I think that the shooting star is sort of a perfect entry point for this too, because of its deep theosophical roots. So I guess the important thing to start out with is all of the original Oz books. And I think I'm gonna just make a number up. I think there's like 13 or something. There's like an insane number of Oz books.
Hmm.
And all these Oz books are deeply rooted in theosophy. And I believe that Frank Baum, even he was a contemporary, even had a think maybe a falling out, I hope I'm not misquoting that, but with Helena Blavatsky. So this isn't just someone that read a book and was like, oh cool, I'm gonna base some fiction on this. He was very deep in the theosophical movement,
Yeah.
and part of that is kind of this idea that I guess Crowley popularized a little bit more,
Hmm.
but that we're all stars, and that the concept of a star is to shine bright and to attract other stars, and that you want to be amongst the rest of the stars. So starting out on this shot of space, this is also a mentality that I guess had been developing for the last 5 decades or so, of like this Hollywood star thing, and everyone's unique and everyone is like capable of making these big impacts and shining. So I
Every
think
man and
that
woman's
that's
a
the
star,
concept.
right?
Every man and woman is a star, yeah.
So, and of course, that star probably would be Sirius. And she's dreaming of Oz. And then I think y'all need to look up Liber Oz. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but here is the sigil of Crowley's Liber Oz. You've seen that, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you're looking at a perspective of some genitals. That is what the circumpunct is, the tip of the spear, so to speak, and then the little gonads and the 666. But this is about like slavery, like mind control. The slave shall serve. Man has to live by his own law. He eat what he will, speak what he will. He has the right to kill um, those who would thwart his rights. And then the last line of it is called "The slaves shall serve." So here we have already connected Frank Baum, who they call the American Wizard, right? Theosophist, a lot of Crowley and Theosophy link up, and this is also going to have some Alice in Wonderland themes. And I'm sure you would agree with this, but Ozma is like her holy guardian angel.
Right. Yeah,
And-
that's a thing that I guess if anyone has just seen the movies or have just kind of paid attention to the pop culture version of this, but Wizard of Oz stands for Ozma, and Ozma is like the actual like not a witch, but sort of like this sorceress that controls all of Oz. She's like a magical queen.
Mhm.
Another thing too about the Liber Oz, even in the movie when Firuza Balk, which is another wild thing, I didn't even remember that. Like going back and rewatching, I had no idea that that was the main character in this. But when she finds this key out in the field in the mundane world, which is
Mhm.
how I kind of separate the like Oz from Kansas, where before she goes to Oz is like the mundane world and this theosophical sort of astral world. But in the mundane world, she finds the key to Oz, and the key itself is just the letter Z inside of this O, and it's
Mhm.
kind of representing like the key to Oz is everything inside of the symbol.
Mm. Well, this is a classic theosophical Rosicrucian idea of like self-actualization. The classic like everything you possess is already inside of you because when you watch Wizard of Oz, um, the lion is already brave, the Tin Man is already loving, and the Scarecrow is already smart. So you already have all of these, and the wizard is just the obstacle is imaginary. And in a way, these are all parts of Dorothy too, like your journey through adulthood. You have to acquire all of these qualities and virtues. So there's a lot of esoteric like reading into just the first Oz itself. But then when you watch Return to Oz, you get a more clearer picture of like the sorcery that's involved in it and like the nefarious nature of how they create, Ubermensch, which are like alternate uh people with alternate personalities. What do you think?
The Return to Oz also, it shows a lot more on certain gestures and hand signs and magical incantations and like the specific order that they all have to go in. There's a
Mm,
magical like reanimation powder that you have to say words in a certain order. So
yeah.
it leans way more into the occult aspect. And I think critically it kind of it didn't do great because it took this darker tone with everything. It didn't have the bright colors and the gold and the emeralds and all that stuff on the first movie. It probably confused a lot of people
Yeah.
going into it. They probably didn't had no idea what they were walking into. That they basically went from like a children's adaptation to a book into an occult adaptation. That there was no really
Yes.
like sweetening of it. I think that that's kind of a fascinating part of it. And also you mentioned like the mind control aspect. The part that I really it was like just standing out to me so strong is that she literally goes to get shock treatment because no one believes her that she was in this other place,
Yeah.
which I guess you'd interpret is that in the mundane world, no one believes this little girl could have actually become enlightened or had any sort of actual revelation. So now she's got some sort of mental illness. And the thing that they're sort of balancing in the movie or in the story is that they have this new technology. They know how to route energy directly into the human brain through these electroconvulsive techniques. And it's kind of being purported as this magical, they don't call it snake oil, but it's essentially like a cure all
Yeah.
device. And this was so sort of counter to the theosophists because the theosophists, I hope I'm not completely wrong about this, but it was like they believe in energy, but energy was almost a representation of consciousness. It wasn't something to be exploited to just turn a lamp on or to just like start a car or whatever. I'm oversimplifying a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, but that the whole premise of the beginning of Return to Oz is that these dumb, mundane bumpkins are taking this electricity and they're trying to just zap your brain with it when really you need to be absorbing it. You need to be like getting that energy through independent study and
Mhm.
theosophy, not through just raw secular science blasting it at you.
Right. So he's the charlatan who does not have the proper initiation. So he's just
Right,
kind
he's like a Cowan or
of, yeah.
something. He's the one that is wielding the technology but doesn't understand it. And
Uh-huh.
even in the very beginning, they make a very specific note to show Dorothy this machine that's eventually going to be the electroshock device. And he's like, "Look at this! It's got, you know, two eyes and a face, and like here's its little mouth or whatever."
Mhm.
And I believe that electro shock therapy device ends up being TikTok, because TikTok
Yeah.
has that metallic face and everything. Like that's the configuration. She ends up becoming friends with it, but she also realizes that this thing is inanimate. Like it's just a wind up thing. It's a mechanical animal for like a Cartesian sort of way of looking at it.
Mhm.
And that kind of like that's the deepest theosophical thing, was that this technology, don't be tricked. Like this freaking moose head that I just attached to a sleigh and I sprinkle this powder dust on it, that's actually real. Like we can actually animate that because
Mhm.
it came from some kind of organic matter. But this thing, this automaton that seems to be alive, it's the farthest thing. And not only is it not alive and can't be animated, but it's kind of like the evil. Like this is the electroshock device that everyone's convinced themselves is this new future. Just kind of wild because we're still sort of doing that now. We're saying like, oh, this new technology is going to change everything.
Well, that reminds me of Scientology too. You know how like you grab the e-meters and they
Yeah.
like, so that could be part of it. Um, did you notice that the chicken was the one that found the key? So talking about the mundane to the spiritual, obviously this is about the initiation of Dorothy and her realizing she is, you know, her higher self through Ozma. Right, we'll get there. I don't want to like spoil it. But where was I going with that?
Bellini, you're talking about Bellini, her chicken that found the key.
Oh, yeah. So the chicken, you know, it's not a very smart or noble animal. It's just a chicken, but it somehow ends up being the savior of them all, right? By laying an egg, which you could talk about eggs and occult for a long time. But the cool thing about this movie that actually makes it like a good movie, maybe not a children's movie, is that, like you said, everything from the time in on Earth, she sees it in Oz. So TikTok is the machine. Even the women's faces when we get to Mombi and she's switching heads, it's like women she's seen in the other world. Even down to props, plants, like everything. And the house also, like, you know, how they're rebuilding the house. Um,
Yeah, because it's again it's 6 months after the first one, so
yeah,
they're leaning into the fact that the tornado took their house away.
right. So that is her psyche, obviously, because you know it's unfinished and there's always a correlation between like houses and your psyche and in mind control and um psychiatry. So there's that. And then she comes on a whirlwind, which a lot of spirits throughout history and literature, like angels come in whirlwinds a lot. So there's a lot being placed on Dorothy. And yeah, like you mentioned, the foreshadowing of everything. And it's interesting how she got to Oz first in the first movie by the wind and the second by the water. What do you think about that?
Oh, I actually just put that together. Yeah, they're going through the different elements. You can even make an argument that the yellow brick road probably could have represented fire or light too. So there's probably she's probably gone through all the elements in Oz at this point,
Mhm,
especially this one being the water that brings her there. And I guess water would also be the more occult of any of the elements to bring you somewhere because it has this unknown depth to it.
mhm.
And
And they
I really like the idea too, and I definitely prescribe that everything that we see of her in Oz, she's still in the mundane world to like everyone else, but she's just going through and seeing everything through these totally different lens.
mhm. A lot of Disney movies have this in common that the mother figure either dies in the movie or has already died, right? I'm sure you noticed that trend.
Yeah, that's basically what I consider that Disney proxy, so that the kid watch, especially if it's one of the first movies that you're seeing as a child, and you
Mhm.
don't have a lot of a frame of reference, it immediately puts you into a traumatized state. Like you no longer have a mother. All right, go.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and we're gonna see how they try to insert other so this is so deep and interesting. Um, she's already an orphan and being raised by her aunt. Then her aunt tries to take her to the, like you said, snake oil salesman, and they even mention this is going to be a new century. Like this is the year 1899 or 1900, and like we're rolling over into like a brand new world with electricity, right? So they're kind of on a cusp or a precipice like we are now with AI. Like we don't know how crazy it's gonna get.
Well,
Um,
they start describing technology, and this, my opinion was this was sort of like the theosophical um criticism of how the normies were seeing electricity, and they make the statement that the brain itself, he's trying to explain it to Dorothy's parents, and they're saying, the brain is kind of just like an electrical machine, and just like all the electrical machines that you're aware of, they can malfunction sometimes they produce excess energy just like any other machine can, but they sell it as, well, now we've got the technology, we can control this excess of electricity. And that they're kind of relaying that Dorothy talking about being in Oz, that's this just excess energy that's in her brain, and they're going to quell that. They're going to figure out a way to stop the excess energy, and this is the wonders of technology.
right, but it comes to find out that this is actually like a house of horrors that, Ozma is saving her from the evil quack guy because well, you can read it in one way. When they flip the switch and the lightning strikes, it doesn't work, right? So on one level of interpreting it, you could say that everything happened after that was a part of a disassociation or, a trip of her, like it actually did work. But if you watch the movie closely, that doesn't make sense. So she actually does manage to escape, and that makes Oz real.
Right, and it's also worth pointing out that they're talking about how they've gained control over this excess of energy, their words in the movie.
Mhm.
Yet that lightning strike causes such an excess of electricity that their technology no longer works. So
Right.
it sort of proves that they're on the wrong path. Like they don't actually understand this technology that they claim to be masters of.
Mhm. So she and it's a pretty intense scene. I mean, they strap her down to the gurney and put the things on her head, and I'm sure you've seen this classic picture of the MK Ultra. It looks very similar to
Right, yeah, the
graphic,
leather
right?
strap on the head, and like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's almost like the same haircut going on. It
Yes.
it definitely had a very odd look to it. This is also a Halloween movie. Like it literally takes place during Halloween, I believe.
Mhm.
Because they note that a few times. And then
Oh,
also
yeah.
while that's happening, she can hear this moaning happening, and she's asking Ozma, like, what are those noises? And she says, well, those are basically the people that did go through the electroconvulsive therapy, and now they lock them in the basement, and they're basically mechanical animals. They're basically like little TikToks running around down there.
Mhm, mhm. Did you notice that the evil lady is the same lady from Willow?
I did not notice that. No, I loved Willow growing up too.
She's the evil queen from Willow, so that just made it even more creepier. And so they have to escape her, and they float away, and somehow she loses Ozma, or Ozma disappears, and she's washes up back in Oz, but now she has to get there a different way. So she has to cross the desert and then, the field. And this is where you start seeing the flashback. So she comes upon a lunch pail tree, and it looks just like the lunch pail that her Aunt M had given her. Because why did Auntie M just drop her off at these strangers' house for the whole day? So she's being abandoned several times. not like necessarily maliciously, but through circumstance, like she's being put in situations that probably shouldn't leave your kid alone with no one, like oh, a weird electroshock doctor of the.
Well, they also, her parents have no idea what to do with her because now they've got this sort of enlightened indigo child living with
Mhm.
them. And this is another thing that
And
stood
they're
out to me.
muggles still, huh?
They're muggle. They're absolute. Not only are they muggles, but they are such muggles that the main reason that they even bring Dorothy here isn't necessarily that they're concerned for her mental health. The mom makes a very explicit statement. She's like, "You've been staying up late, like you can't get to sleep, and now you can't help on the farm." And it was that you can't help us in our mundane tasks on this mundane world. So
Yeah.
now we have to fix you. We have to whatever weird enlightenment stuff you got going on. It's affecting your ability to just work on these fields with us, and that was the real issue. So you can
She's like, "You're
almost
no you're
interpret
of no
it
use to me anymore," because
right, like stop with all the philosophy and the theosophy. Like let's
Mhm.
fix you so that you don't care about these otherworldly things anymore, and you just come back and do farm work. So
Right.
they're almost that they weren't trying to fix her because they were concerned. They were trying to zap any of this enlightenment right back out of her so that she could go back to being a muggle.
Oh, good point. So she comes upon her old house that brought her there, which is her old mind, right? Her old self. She's like, "I used to live here, but I don't live there anymore." So she shed this, persona, and she's like pupating into a new, like you said, initiate, um, on this magical journey towards what are they called? Ascended masters.
Right. The theosophical idea that once you get to like a certain checkpoint, you get to go and like live in the skies for a while. And I
Mm,
like how you said she's almost going through a metamorphosis from a pupa because the first thing that she does after she leaves that deadly desert, which just absorbs all water if you touch it,
mhm,
is she finds that tree and she has to pick a ripe one because there's green lunch pails and then there's red lunch pails. So she picks the red lunch pail that kind of does show that she's ripened. Like she's already been here before. She's already
mm,
shed the old one. So
mhm,
she's not green now. Now she's like ready to open the real meal to get her like sustenance for her second adventure through this.
mhm. And this is where you are introduced to the minions of the Gnome King, who are super creepy, and they like
The
can
Wheelers.
morph. No, the guys that morph through the rocks and spy on you.
Oh, yes, the little eyeballs that start
Yeah,
poking out of the rocks.
yeah. And this I learned about in Fritz Springmeier too, in relation to like a Britney Spears video. So what they'll say is that items can hear you and they report back to your handler, so you better watch what you say and do at all times because we're watching you, right? So in the
This one
Britney,
also made me think of the tunnel in Labyrinth where she goes down and it's all like the hands
we're helping.
that are all
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
That yeah, that even if you feel like you're abandoned in this lost world, there's someone there, but it's not someone to make you feel better. It's someone that's sort of keeping tabs on you and reporting back.
hmm. And the Gnome King, he's obviously the elemental earth because he's all rocks, right? Um, and he the same guy that played the Doctor? Because a lot of the people from the real world show up and but I couldn't notice because he had all gray. I should have looked it up. I'm being unprofessional,
That's a
but
good question. I don't know if he was, but yeah, if you can look it up and find out for sure. But
okay.
he the Rock King, this one also made me think of Snow White all over again because even this Gnome King that lives in kind of like created from rocks and controls all these other like rock sort of entities, he has this thing that he's complaining about, that all these gems that he's got in his world and these humans keep coming and taking his gems away, or that the people of Oz were taking the gem. This is where all the emeralds from the emerald cities came from, is that they were removing it from him. And the occult premise of Snow White, which gets into sort of like hermetic stories, was that they were making an exchange, that these earth elementals, which were the gnomes, again, Gnome King, but the dwarves in Snow White are earth elementals, and
Mhm.
they're the ones that can go into the dark and they can retrieve these gems, but that they have no use for these gems because they don't emit any light themselves, and it's Snow White that is emitting the light, and the concept being that the light is this human consciousness.
Mhm.
So the earth elementals are have this equal exchange where Snow White is teaching them things. Here's how to cook and clean, here's how to sing and dance, things that they would never have any interaction with. And in exchange for that, it's like, okay, well, here's the gems from our world, you're giving us gems from your world. But in this movie, the Gnome King, he's kind of complaining about like an imbalance here where the humans and all the entities of Oz are taking the gems from this earth realm, but they're not necessarily giving anything back. They're not bestowing knowledge or any human consciousness in return. And
Mhm.
that's what's created this. And now the kind of pendulum is swinging in this movie, Return to Oz. Now the Gnome King has taken over. He's the one that rules all of Oz. Everything's been turned to stone now. Everything's inanimate.
Mhm. Everything is of his element now. And he thinks that the Emerald City was stolen from his realm.
Right, the all the gems that was used to power them and give them all their technology, everything, it was stolen, and that no one gave him an equal share back. He didn't have a Snow White to teach him how to dance and sing. They were just taking the stuff and building this city out of it. And even if you go and rewatch the first Wizard of Oz movie, it's kind of like a secret society. Like even if you know where the Emerald City is, you got to knock 3 times, you got to give the secret password
Mhm.
in order before you're admitted. So
Mhm.
they're kind of not taking the gems from the world and then like sharing the light and sharing consciousness. They're keeping it for themselves and keeping it hidden. So I think that the Gnome King is kind of like the exact opposite of that. He's like, well, if you guys are gonna create a secret society and hoard this for yourselves, I'm taking it all back and I'm turning everyone to stone.
Mhm. And that's also kind of a reference to like the Himalayas, which they believe a lot of their um demigods or gods or hidden masters reside in, or at least take up residence for thousands of years, right? So inside of the walls of the Himalayas, and that's expeditions they would go to Tibet. I'm sure you've heard of Nicholas Roerich and all of that. So that all fits in perfectly with TheOZophy.
Right. I didn't even put that together either. That's perfect.
TheOZophy.
TheOZophy.
Yeah. So again, Dorothy has to do some kind of David and Goliath, stand up to an impossible foe, um, which the wizard in the first one was just the illusion of obstacles because you're a magician, right?
Yeah, all she had to do in the first movie was get the courage to challenge the authority, and that was and then just by challenging the authority or questioning it directly, she kind of overcame it. And
Hmm.
this one, it's a little bit more dire. Like there's actual people that have lost their heads, and there's people that have physically changed, and it's like a barren wasteland.
Hmm.
So the threat in this one is a lot more explicit.
So she has just come back to Oz and she's found the house in disrepair and the yellow brick road is all busted up. Um, and it's only been 6 months for her, but it's been years and years and years for Oz, right?
But she's still too young because when she runs into Princess Mombi,
Hmm.
which is weird. I wonder if it was supposed to sound like mommy or like mum, but like Princess
Yeah, yeah,
Mombi,
yeah.
she takes she finds Dorothy, and she's she wants to take her for her head, but she mentions that her head's too small. Like you're too young, your head's too small, it won't fit on my head yet. So
Hmm.
you still have like some gestation apparently to go through, but I'm
Hmm.
gonna put you in this tower, and then if I keep you in the tower long enough, then your head will be compatible with the rest of my heads. That all feels very occult too.
She
Mind
has some
control,
degrees
right?
of initiation to go through, right?
Right, yeah, you have to be molded, you have to be sort of like chipped away and turned into this ashlar
Yeah.
stone before we can put you into the building.
So yeah, she makes it to past the Wheelers, which I mean, why do you hate kids? Okay, that's that's terrifying. Um, and meets TikTok and gets to Mombi, and Mombi throws her in the tower. and she meets Jack, the pumpkin head, which if you notice when the um snake oil salesman lady assistant put her in the room is like, here, take a nap. And she locked her in that dingy room, right? When she hasn't slept for 6 months, why is she gonna take a nap in this weird ass place? And there's like a pumpkin on the table. So that's Jack
Because
in,
it's Halloween, yeah.
yeah. So Jack wakes up and he thinks that she's the mom. He thinks Dorothy is his mom when it was actually Ozma, but Dorothy and Ozma are one, so he's also got a mommy abandonment type issues, right?
Yeah, Dorothy's sort of the physical manifestation of Ozma. So, like, I guess in a Rosicrucian way, which is easy to conflate Rosicrucianism and theosophical ideals. It kind of they play in the same sandbox and they derive some of the same things. But in the idea of Rosicrucianism being that you can have this consciousness that has no material density, but once it gets close enough to a mundane world of some kind, the material starts building itself around this consciousness like a shell. The
Mm.
best analogy, I think this came from a Manly Palmer Hall book, but he has this analogy where if you imagine that like your soul or consciousness is like your hand, and you keep putting gloves on it. Like the first glove is when you enter a new material world, and you put another glove on as you get closer to the ground. At a certain point, you've got like 100 gloves on your hand where you can't really even feel your hand anymore. It's just this big numb like massive material. And that's
Uh,
sort of Dorothy. Dorothy is the version of Ozma that's got all these gloves on so that she can exist in the mundane world, but really it's the same person.
mm-hmm. So interesting. So I don't like the Gump. What do you make of him? Like, what is he in this esoteric? Because I couldn't figure out what he's supposed to represent. Um,
So I
actually,
have to go out on a limb a little bit on this one, but they describe Gump as a cross between an elk and a
uh,
goat.
yeah,
But to me, it's like this is the goat head. If you were into theosophy really big, you probably are familiar with the history of magic, and Eliphas Levi's work, right? So this is the goat of Mendes, I think. This is that goat head, which represents sort of profane magic. And what's the thing that they do with Gump is they animate it. They strap it to this big sleigh and they put all these things on it, and then
yeah,
she sprinkles the powder of life on it. And
yeah.
this is the first time they have to do a legitimate incantation where she says we are tia pia. You have to say it in that order,
Yo?
we are pia tia. And in the book they go a step further and they state that when you say those words, the first word you have to raise your left hand with your little finger up when you say we are. Then you have
Mhm.
to raise your right hand with your thumb up saying tia, and then you have to use both hands with all your fingers spread out and say pia. So it's like left hand, right hand, both hand. Like it's not just they sprinkle powder on it, which is more typical classic Disney. You put a
Mhm.
little magic powder on it, the thing flies. You put magic powder, it comes back to life. In this
Fairy
one, it's
dust.
like, no, there's more to it.
Yeah, Tinkerbell fairy dust, right?
Right. Well, in that one, you also have to clap, but
Yeah.
yeah, this one is the most. This one actually feels like Dorothy is reading these instructions out of a grimoire versus it's just Disney magic.
Well, is he like a homunculus? Gump, homunculus? Because he's like
Um,
all parts of different things mished together.
I would say golem, maybe closer to a
Okay,
golem,
yeah, okay. A gump.
right?
Yeah.
Like an amalgamation of different body parts that have been like forced together. And he can fly, and that was the other thing too, that Gump is, I guess, more real than TikTok is, the weird little robot guy, because TikTok is not an animate object.
Mhm.
It's completely inanimate in that it's mechanical. It doesn't have any organic material to it. So I wonder if you put the powder of life on TikTok, if anything would have happened, or if it only
Oh,
would have
yeah.
worked for, because she has to keep winding TikTok up. But it's like, if you got magic powder that just makes things come to life, you don't got to wind this guy up anymore. I feel like that was another nod to like technology is not the same as like real organic living life. Even if it's already dead, necromancy is more powerful than the technology.
Well, he even mentions he's proud of his lifelessness.
Right. Like yeah, he's like he's glad that he doesn't have to go through these trials and tribulations that Dorothy is. He can just not be wound up and go to sleep for 1,000 years and it's
Yeah.
all the same to him. He doesn't
Well,
care.
and that's what saved him in the end, right? Because he wasn't turned into an object, because he didn't have life. So,
Right, so he couldn't be converted into like one of these green
yeah.
items in this weird memory palace.
hmm To honestly, I didn't like any of her companions in this. I guess the chicken was okay because it was sassy, but
Well, that was Toto. That she needed a Toto, so that kind of filled up that role for her.
um, and I just my OCD did not like the falling apartness of the Gump and the Jack just like put that thing out of its misery. It's falling apart, you know.
The part that was really annoying me the most out of all of it was the face of the Scarecrow. When they
That
finally
was
meet up with the
terrible.
Scarecrow.
Yes.
I
Woo!
couldn't under with the amount of budget that went into this movie. I can't understand why the Scarecrow had this. It looks like they went to Kmart on the way to filming the scene, and they
I
just
don't like
grabbed
the
one of those
Gump.
off
The
the.
Scarecrow is weird. I do, right? Yeah,
I didn't. I really don't understand what the artistic direction was for that Scarecrow.
that was so bad. And it didn't even have a like you just wanted to punch it in the face. You know what it looked like? Raggedy Ann or Andy doll. Remember that thing?
Right, and it couldn't emote. It just had one facial expression, which is odd.
It was terrible.
There,
Um,
there was another thing too that was in the book that they didn't point out in the movie. Maybe it would have been a little bit too morbid, but when Dorothy first comes across those headless sculptures, which we find out later, those are the bodies to the women that Princess Mumby has collected, that like she puts all their heads on, but they
mhm,
also walk by the Tin Man. And in the book of the Return to Oz, they have this whole line where the Tin Man keeps cutting parts of his body off
mhm.
and replacing them with tin. So it was like an actual person that keeps
Oh,
like chopping himself up and replacing it, almost like this weird ship of Theseus angle, but that also plays into this weird cybernetic transhumanist idea of the electroshock and the wheelers and fusing with technology. The Tin Man, I think, represented that as the worst way that it can go. And that's why he needed the heart in the original book, was because he went so far down that path of transhumanism that he needed to walk it back a little bit.
mhm. Do you think the Wheelers were the gurney that strapped her down because they were like
Oh,
full of
I
belts?
didn't think that until just now. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and also the obvious too is that they are the new flying monkeys because you have to have like the minions that fly around. But yeah, it makes sense that they are the gurneys.
Okay.
I
Um,
love that. That's awesome.
what do you make of well, so she gets to the Gnome King and there's always a deal, like a wager, Villains always love to bet. And why do you think it was the egg that poisoned him in the end?
Well, the egg represents life, or more importantly, the potential to create life. And this
Interesting.
is something that the Gnome King has no business in this world. He's just
Oh,
rocks
uh-huh.
and inanimate objects and these earth elementals. And the earth elementals are different than like this life-giving. Like this is the version of the Snow White. Like this is the human element, but unlike the earth elementals and Snow White and the ones that are making these exchanges,
hmm
he's turned off to the concept of consciousness, and it's almost like the antithesis of him. And in fact, I think they cite that this is poison to him. At least in
hmm
the book, they mention that eggs are poison and that eggs are and chickens are not allowed anywhere. So
hmm
yeah, it would make sense in a theosophical sense that something capable of creating life would be the ultimate victor over something that is completely inanimate.
Also a feminine principle too,
Absolutely, yeah.
right? Um, so the egg overcomes the Gnome King. Um, what do you make of the ruby slippers real fast? I'm starting to like wind down because I'm still sick, but I could talk about this all day, but
Well, I think the slippers being red was a device of the movies, and I think in the books they weren't ruby slippers.
oh right.
They were some
Uh-huh.
other color, were they silver or something? I can't
Yeah.
remember what color they were. Um, but it's interesting too because that gets continued, like in the movie version as this thing act. I guess in a very meta way, right?
Hmm.
The as this theosophical story literally enters the mundane world through film and like actual actors acting out in mundane film sets, they do sort of change some of the different elements. So this is almost like that corruption that gets introduced when you try and take a theosophical concept and manifest it and explain it in a different way. So these are like the little reverberations because it's odd that the ruby slippers end up being a focal point. Like it's almost impossible to talk
Hmm.
about Wizard of Oz and not conjure up this idea of the ruby red slippers, which
Hmm.
in itself is almost like this exoteric red herring, where focus on the slippers, don't look at all this
Oh,
theosophy
good
behind the
point.
scenes.
That's just a little misdirection.
That's how I see it. Yeah.
Okay. Um, so everything is restored, but she wants to be in both places at the same time at the end. And she makes that comment like, I wish I could live here and there, but apparently that's impossible.
Well,
And
only because the mundane world can't accept her for
right.
doing that. I think she realizes that she could live in both places, but
Uh-huh.
she'd probably find herself in strapped down on a gurney
Yeah,
frequently. So like
good
yeah,
point.
you have to make the decision between the two.
Until she gets like a little coven of her own or some kind of, like she can't live in the muggle world, but if she finds other theosophists or star seeds, right? Then they
Yeah, her other indigo children gang.
yes,
Yeah.
then they can go to Mars. Um so Princess Ozma comes out of the mirror. That's kind of the obvious part where you're realizing that this is another higher form of Dorothy, right?
Right, literally her just in a different realm.
Yeah. And she goes back home and she wakes up after the flood, so she returns again through the waterway and she wakes up on the sand after the flood. And the story was that lightning struck the clinic and the doctor died because he was trying to save the machines instead of get out of the fire. What do you make of that? So he's clinging to his technology and it was his demise in the end, right?
Right, again, just like the machine malfunctioned because it got this excess of energy,
Mhm.
he also gets an excess of energy, which causes him to malfunction permanently. So
Mhm.
it's the ultimate. I guess this is the strongest theosophical, I guess, like lesson that they're teaching you is that if you put all your energy into the technology, then it's going to kill you. Like if that's going to be your demise.
Mhm.
Whereas Dorothy is the one that is still operating with this extra energy, but she's applying it in these, occult and sort of arcane ways and not in the mundane world.
Mhm. Well, was there anything that you didn't get to in your great review of Return to Oz? So it's like number one in Occult Disney on your playlist, right? Return to Oz.
It was the most recent one that we had done, yeah. And we did like a dark Disney series where we just
Uh-huh.
did the scariest, purportedly the scariest of all of the Disney movies that were
Oh,
meant to be like that.
what are those?
It was Return to Oz,
Uh-huh.
The Black Hole,
Uh-huh.
Watcher in the Woods,
Uh-huh.
and what was the other one that we were going to talk about? Something
Oh,
Wicked
something
Just When It
wicked just
Comes.
becomes okay. Yeah, we'll get there. Sorry.
And these ones were, I mean, this one being a Halloween movie, I think they definitely leaned into some of the creepier
Mm.
aspects of it. The
Hmm.
one that was the most shocking to hear the reason why the movie existed was Watcher in the Woods.
Hmm.
And this was Disney saw how commercially successful The Exorcist was, and they
Oh,
were like, we want to do that. Like
okay.
we want some of that action.
Where was some of that demon possession action? So, was there any like things that stuck out to you that you wanted to get to on Return to Oz but you
Yeah,
didn't.
well, there was a weird tangent that I ended up going down. I was reading more about the actual history of the Gnome King,
Uh-huh.
because in the books, there's not just one Gnome King. There's a whole line of Gnome Kings that like supersede each other, and they've got different names and stuff.
Hmm.
But one of these Gnome Kings, it was sort of conflated with Santa Claus. There was an actual Santa Claus story by Frank Baum,
Hmm.
and his reindeer were wheelers. So there's a that
Hmm.
seems like an incredible. I don't think it's ever been adapted into a movie,
Hmm.
but that feels like a rabbit hole. Maybe I'd like to go down for Christmas or something. Like what is the connection between Santa Claus being driven around by these crazy wheelers, which might be these gurneys, represented by gurneys in an insane asylum?
Oh my gosh, yes. Um, do you know there's a movie called Gnome King, a Disney movie? Me and Paul talked about it. It's a weird one, about a tycoon going to the redwoods and he finds the gnomes. Have you heard of that one?
I've heard of Red Gnome or Gnomobile,
No,
but no. Is that what
no,
you're talking about? Gnomobile?
Gnomemobile. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Gnomemobile.
Nomo, it's about Bohemian Grove.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that movie is an absolute fever dream. And
Do
it
you cover
is
that one?
yeah, we covered that one. I think
Uh-huh.
we did it in our Bedknobs and Broomsticks movie, because I think it was either the same two kids from that, or it was the same two kids from Mary
It
Poppins.
was Mary
The
Poppins. Yeah.
the Mary Poppins kids. But it's one of those things that my friend was telling me, oh yeah, it's all about Bohemian Grove. It's like, okay, no, I get it that you're kind of conflating it. No, it's literally about this rich California businessman that owns like all this acreage in the redwood forest, and that he's going in there to find this secret society that no one else knows about, and they're almost dying out, and he has to find a way to reinvigorate this secret society
Yeah.
and get
He
them
has
to
to get
continue.
the gnomes
It's like
together.
this is obviously about Bohemian Grove.
Yeah, and like sex rituals and weird fairy.
100%. Yeah, the whole
Yeah.
point is that they're trying to find a bunch of chicks that this guy can just like, lay down the law so that they can repopulate
Uh-huh.
this gnome. Which again, if you know anything about actual Bohemian Grove lore, they've got this concept called, I think it's called jumping the river or
Mhm.
something. But all these guys go out to this all men exclusive camp, but right over the river they've got like these brothels that people fly out, and they set up in these brothels just to coordinate with when Bohemian Grove is going to be there, because this is their busiest time of the year with like the
Mhm,
biggest
mhm,
payers.
mhm.
So yeah, it was just like, yeah, Bohemian Grove has always been about going out in the middle of the woods and doing sex rituals.
Yeah. It's so in your face when you like actually know what's going on. They playing in your face. Um, so if you guys want a great breakdown of Return to Oz, go to Paranoid Americans channel. And also Jay and Baselit Analyzer did Return to Oz. They did a great 3-hour deep dive into that a year ago. So check that out. The only thing I didn't mention was, let's see, Crowley MK Ultra Diary of a Drug Fiend. Oh, okay. So drugs and all of that like stuff comes from Crowley. Emerald Tablets of Thoth is the Emerald City. What do you make of that?
Yeah, and also what was leading you to the Emerald Tablets of Thoth in the original movie was like the big opium fields,
Right.
which
Drugs.
was another like this inebriation concept that like you have to go through like another altered state of consciousness before you can fully get there.
So it's a shamanic journey also.
Yeah, that, and also maybe even a like a defense mechanism that if you get so enamored with the opium fields before you get there, that'll weed out a lot of the people that maybe don't have the best intentions to actually get to the real gems. Like if you can be sold on numbing yourself to the rest of the world, but even through that, if you're still like working towards this higher understanding, getting,
Mhm.
getting the Emerald City, then yeah, it's a way of sort of part of the initiation ritual. It'll weed out the people that are not worthy of it.
Have you seen that esoteric movie Holy Mountain?
Absolutely, yeah.
So
Yarovsky movie.
yeah, that's the at the end of that, they get stuck. A lot of people get stuck at the city right under the mountain because, like you said, they get pulled into the drugs and vices, and they never ascend to the peak because of that part.
And the scene where they've got like thousands of saviors, like false saviors.
Yeah.
So there's so many to pick from that no one knows what the real sort of route is.
Yeah. And this tale is more about like the salvation can be awakened within you, because the parts of Dorothy have to be reintegrated, the scarecrow, the lion, the tin man. Um what do you think of Wicked? So this is gonna be huge. Is it out yet?
Oh, I haven't been following along other than the drama between the poster stuff where people were making alternate posters and now they got the porn site on the back of the toy and yeah.
That's
Um
right. Okay, so you guys don't know about this. They sent out this official Wicked doll, Mattel, like the Wicked Barbie. It wasn't Barbie, but it was like that. And then a QR code on the back went right to a corn site. So they had to recall all those things. And everyone's like, is this on purpose? Um,
I mean, a
I'm being
lot
honest.
of people dropped the ball. If it wasn't intentional, a
Yeah, no
lot of
one
people.
scanned that. I'm like, when the internet just came out when I was like in college, I went to hotmail.com, MALE on accident or by accident one time. I was trying to get to Hotmail and I got Hotmails. Um, but yeah, so Wicked is coming out. That was a book, and in that book, they actually say the word theosophy. So we're not just speculating. Like they tell you in the Wicked series, like this is a theosophical fairy tale. But now they're uh spotlighting different characters, and they are trying to make us empathize more with villains. Have you noticed that? Like in the Disney theme park, there's going to be another like world, like Villain Land.
Right, and you've got like the Cruella de Vil movie
Hmm.
that came out. They're basically
Maleficent.
what do they call this? Retconning, where you retroactively like change the background of certain characters. And I think part of this too, outside of the occult version of this, which is always present, of course, but
Mhm.
I would almost always make a good counter argument that just as nefarious as any of the occult sort of like symbolism they're trying to bake into this is that just raw commercialism, and they realize that man, people love Ursula, people love Cruella de Vil, and we can't really start just selling the toys because they're bad guys. So if we retcon them and make them good guys,
Mhm.
now we've got this whole extra set of like nostalgia baked intellectual property that they haven't even tapped into yet. Another big aspect of this is Disney now has a card game which is similar to like Magic the Gathering. I don't know
Mm.
if you know about like all these like Dungeons and Dragons style card. So their card game called Lorcana, and that's another version of now you can build a deck with all Disney villains and have it
Mhm.
like work for you. So I do think that there's an absolute path where they're paving here to just market on all this backlog of cool characters that they can just push that have kind of been just sitting dormant in the background.
Yeah. Have you seen the Ursula did nothing wrong meme?
No, I mean I already agree with it, but no,
Yeah.
what's the
Well,
full meme?
just that she got screwed out of she's related to Prince or the King Triton somehow, and she got screwed, and Ariel did sign the contract and she tried to warn her, and like
Right.
they stabbed her in the gut with a ship anyways, like um so yeah, it's funny how they try and go back and give more backstory to because it's true, like mistreated people do become the villain. So that element of it is like be
What
careful what you do to people because you might be creating a supervillain.
Ursula is a really good example of how Disney changes the DNA of these stories around too, because they created Ursula so that you had a very specific scapegoat to kind of blame like all the evils on in this particular movie. Disney actually does a really good job of creating a certain villain, and like that's the source of all the bad things in this particular story. That
Mhm.
becomes Ursula. But in the original Little Mermaid story, Christian Andersen, the bad guy was just the mermaids themselves. Like all mermaids were kind of bad in this story
Mm.
because mermaids realized that when they died, they just turned into sand. And they didn't ascend to heaven, they didn't have an afterlife, they had nothing. They just ceased to exist. And
Mhm.
the entire premise of Little Mermaid is that she wants to have a human soul so that she can also live in the afterlife.
Hmm.
And the only way to do that is to get this human to fall in love with you. And in the book, she doesn't succeed. She does not get the prince to fall in love with her. So she's condemned to not go into the afterlife. But then all of her family and her friends, like, I'm just joking, like even Sebastian too, and like Flounder, like all
Uh-huh.
of her homies under the sea, they
Uh,
basically tell her, well, if he didn't love you to get the soul, just kill him. If you take him out, then you can get his soul, and then you can have this afterlife. And
mhm.
the moral in the book was that she was like, no, I don't want to do that either. But that the whole premise is that there was no Ursula. It was just everybody else that was a mermaid. Everyone was jealous of having this afterlife.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, but in the movie, it's conveniently like one person that you point to because you can't really paint everyone else as the bad guys.
So you're talking about Hans Christian Andersen book?
The original Little Mermaid, yeah, the
Okay.
original Mermaid was all about she wanted to live on into the afterlife, and the only way you could do that was to get a human to willingly kind of give that to you by falling in love. It's very similar in theme, I think, to the whole Snow White and Seven Dwarfs, where you have to have an equal exchange where you're saying, "Here, I'm going to share human consciousness and humanity with you in exchange for this other thing that I'm getting in return." But in Little Mermaid, she doesn't really offer anything else to the prince in exchange for that consciousness, and he ends up falling in love with another human.
So that's sort of like an elemental's journey towards apotheosis, but humanity is one of the stops on, I don't know. I just pulled that out of nothing, but because the gnome king, what were we talking about?
Well,
Little
the mermaids are very similar to the Gnome King and all the Earth
Yeah,
elementals in that, and it's almost like the fallen angels is another good
point.
analogy here because it's these things that have existed before humanity, but humanity pops up and they're like, I want what they have, and the only way they can get it is usually by tricking us or
Mhm.
doing some
Mhm.
sort of bartering system.
Mhm.
But very rarely does it work out if someone tries and steal humanity or the consciousness, and vice versa. Humanity doesn't work out if it tries to steal the treasures of the mundane world. There always has to be some sort of an equal exchange there.
Mhm. Well, this has been a great show. Perfect. Everything was great. We could do this all day, and we're not replacing Paul Hall. We're gonna do Mars Needs Moms and a movie called Red that someone recommended about. It was a Disney movie called Red, and they said watch it if you think this is about menstrual cycles. So I was like, okay.
Oh, the panda movie, right?
Yeah.
The yeah, okay.
Um, but maybe if Thomas comes back, would you
I'd,
consider
I'd love to.
Okay, great. So maybe we can talk about Walt Disney on the front lines next time, the military aspect of the whole Disney empire. And I want you guys all to go join the Occult Book Club at Paranoid American YouTube, right?
Yes, thank you. You can go to if you just go to occultbookclub.com, it'll bring you right to the playlist on YouTube.
And he's even got a trading card, right? And can you buy these online or do you have to?
Yes, nope, you can get all those on paranoidamerican.com. That's the Occultist Monday series, which was a brainchild of Juan Ayala of the One on One podcast. So definitely, if you like those Occultist Mondays, definitely check out his work too.
The, hom-
TJOJP.com.
the homunculus, possessed states. What else we've got?
Wait, and I also worked, I don't know if I have a
Chess.
copy of it, but I've got a book, a comic book that I made with Juan called the Homunculus Owner's Manual
Okay.
that walks through exactly what a homunculus is, all the historical instances of them. There's we go into like a Crowleyan homunculus, an Epsteinian
Oh,
homunculus. There's
really? Is that
all different
connected?
forms of it.
Is that connected to like the nuclear stuff too?
There we have one of those instances of that too. It goes
Okay.
over every different version of it. So there's physical versions, there's astral versions, there's conscious versions of all
Oh,
these
okay.
different homunculi.
Okay. Very cool. Well, you're a regular now, so I hope you like it here. Um,
I
and
love it. This was so cool. I love
yeah,
talking about this.
I'm sure everyone's gonna freak out about you, and I want to thank you so much, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.